I don't know about you, but for pretty much every gaming presentation I've ever watched, I've always seen one game that stands out among the rest of the announcements from that show, which leaves me unbelievably hyped and mostly focusing on it over every other game. In the case of the August 2020 Nintendo Direct Partner Showcase, that game was Puyo Puyo Tetris 2, a sequel to one of my favorite games at the time, and a new game for a series I had gone into earlier that year. It was one of those games where I remember when I first heard it announced. It's slightly nostalgic, but of course it's not like I want to go back to that moment, because, you know. One of the reasons that this was such a big deal was that it was the first Puyo game to be released at roughly the same time worldwide in ages, if not ever. You don't count! This was another sign that Sega might finally be truly acknowledging the smaller yet dedicated fanbase of the Puyo series in the West, as they felt confident enough, or at least confident enough to release a second Puyo game packaged with Tetris. This should have gone down in retrospect as a triumph for the Western fanbase. So why is this game so heavily controversial amongst that same fanbase? Well, let's dive in and find out as we revisit
Puyo Puyo Tetris 2!
Before getting into any of the big modes of this game, I just wanted to give some smaller notes about the game that don't really connect as much to what I'll be talking about when discussing the modes, but I still think is worth mentioning. First off, the enhanced spell animations for the characters in this game are awesome. It's small, but it does a lot to make these characters shine even more, especially when the story mode operates like a PowerPoint presentation, as the character models just switch without any real transition like it's a YouTube video. Honestly, the art style in general is a massive step up from Puyo Tetris 1, and the difference was that much more noticeable when I went back to play that game. Another thing I like is the character roster. I feel like there's a solid mix of Sega era characters, while also leaving room for the Major and Pyle era characters to get in. Sonic being there as a guest character is also nice, although I kinda wish that there was another character or two from a different series squeezed in. For once, the developers decided to get rid of the dumb rule that I'm 99% sure existed that a Puyo game couldn't have more than 24 characters, as this game had 28 at launch, and went up to 40 after the free updates added. You heard me, free updates. Sega ended up releasing 3 post-launch updates that added new characters, features, and modes to the game entirely for free. This still bugs me a bit because it's withholding content that probably could have been here at launch. I would know this as a Nintendo fan, but better late than never on some of these features, I guess. Also, we can finally choose between English and Japanese voices on consoles. As one very minor grievance, I am sad that the characters no longer say Sega or Tetris when the game initially loads up. Now that I've gone over that, let's get into the things that actually matter. So we go into the main menu and yeah, this is extremely similar to the first game. But maybe there's more modes within these modes that we won't know about until we jump in, starting with the adventure mode. It's now that I present to you the Oscar-winning plot of Puyo Puyo Tetris 2. We begin with this random girl whose name is an example of changing up the answers a bit so the teacher doesn't find out they copied someone else's homework. We then flash to Ringo at Suzerain Junior High, and she goes on the same beginning monologue that she did in Puyo Tet 1, and what a surprise! The thing she thought could never happen is exactly what happened. Though this time, it's T and O, just getting randomly thrown out of the sky or something by X. The two comment about how they vaguely remember each other, but can't quite put their finger on it. Some people may get annoyed at this development, because this means that time is used re-establishing past bonds, but come on, this is a Puyo game. Characters forgetting each other is about as inevitable as Mariah Carey playing in a Walmart in December. So anyways, the two battle, and through that, they remember each other, and are told that some random being is forcing the worlds of Puyo and Tetris to merge. X then tells them that they have to be the ones to find out what's going on, because he's doing something. It's never really brought up after this moment, so I'm just gonna have to assume it's related to his duties as Keeper of Dimensions. Getting back on topic, they decide their best course of action to start is to find people who will help them, therefore giving us an excuse to introduce the main supporting characters. They decide to explore other areas of Suzerain to try and find the person who may be the cause of the two worlds merging, where we find out that through a Puyo battle, Oro and Carbuncle, along with Amity, have been warped to Suzerain, because this is how every Puyo game is. Oh yeah, and Ringo and T also stumble upon Merle by complete accident, the case of changing up the homework I mentioned earlier, who appears to be the culprit of the entire worlds merging thing. Merle states she's doing all of this because she wants to see everyone having fun. The SS Tetra crew arrives shortly after, but agree with S doing what S does, and just absolutely grilling T for something that wasn't really his fault. But anyways, the rest of the SS Tetra crew joins the fray throughout Chapter 2, and throughout that chapter, the game pieces together that Marle gains power through battles, which explains why she wants to see people battling each other. Marle slowly starts to break through these exchanges, implying there's more to the worlds merging, as she leads the game by saying that she knows what she's doing isn't really fun, but to stop doing it wouldn't be right. After this, Lemurs appears, stating that he's been investigating what's been going on due to things that have been happening in Primtown. Everyone then sees that most of their friends are obsessed with battling, and they have to battle someone who knows what's going on in order to cure them.
Ecolo, did you actually...
That's right! I wanted you to come and help me personally! That's why I let myself get corrupted on purpose.
After these battles, everyone involved mentions that they remember a girl, the girl in question being Marle, coming up to them for a battle, and afterward, only remembering a strong urge to battle. The three separate groups eventually reconvene to talk about what they know, and then Satan comes out of nowhere. Yes, I know he's actually called the Dark Prince in the West, but most people over here still call him Satan, so that's the name I'll be referring to him as throughout this video and any future Puyo related vids I make. But anyways, Satan talks about the dimensional parasite, which everyone at this point believes to be Marle. Now, as Satan is the primary antagonist throughout the series, and Arl is the primary protagonist, how do you think Satan views Arl? Alright, pencils down, answer in 3, 2, 1.
Arlie, Car Bunny, it is I, the nobility of the night, the chaperone of the shadows, the gallant of the gloom. The Dark Prince is at your service. I've rushed to your aid in your time of need. Mwah, mwah, mwah. But with yours truly by your side, you've nothing to fear. Now, Arlie, accept the aid of the Dark Prince, and may your passions for me burn brighter than 1,000 suns.
Yeah, that's right. Satan is a
S to the I to the M to the P.
For Arl. After that, we chase Marle down, and we just keep beating her over and over again in battles until she finally cracks. It's here where we see Marle in her true form. Here we find out that it's not Marle that's the dimensional parasite, but some other person. And if you thought that Marle was an uncreative name, just wait until you see this.
Squares.
You are continuing to battle and spread fun, aren't you? Fun governs your very existence, after all.
Squares used Marle as a vessel for spreading the urge to battle, and was the true culprit in causing the worlds to merge. Marle reveals she doesn't know exactly what she and Squares are, but believes they were watching over the puzzle worlds for some time before something happened. Some random voices were calling out to each other from the two separate worlds, wanting to see each other again. Turns out that those voices were Ringo, T, and the rest of these random kids. Marle states that she split responsibilities with Squares, as Marle was about fun and Squares was about order. Squares then took control of Marle, forced the worlds to merge, and wanted to basically kill the group for not being orderly enough. Wait, so Squares is a kid that's obsessed with maintaining order, has a flawed and limited worldview, threatens to off the main protagonist, and is voiced by Zeno Robinson. Wait a minute. Anyways, Echo does whatever the hell this is to Ringo.
Knock it off!
You know you want to!
Huh. Ecolo? Why do you gotta do things we can't even show to the audience?
Then, Satan drops the harsh truth that as of right now, the gang isn't strong enough to face Squares. Yeah, go tell that to this 12 chain I made this morning. T realizes that X knows about the situation, and so the gang goes back to him as a means of coaching to get stronger. X says that Marle is the key to becoming strong enough to face Squares by remembering everything about what happened between them. So it's here we go on a training arc that's the calm before the storm that is the final chapter really. There are some fun moments here as well. These battles are themed and are used as a means to help Marle remember what happened between her and Squares.
Oh, you and I are bound and gagged together.
Beautiful. World-class legs! Humanity's greatest treasure!
Marle saw everyone battling and got lonely, which led to her using her powers to create Squares. Everything was all fine and dandy until the Puyo and Tetris worlds merged together, which set off Squares' order sensors. Despite Marle and Squares wiping the memories of everyone involved, their bonds remained. Marle loved it, but Squares hates heartwarming moments and sought to take care of it by taking control of Marle. After that, Echo and Sand come in and are like, hey, we found Squares. Meanwhile, Squares acts like your average edgy 12-year-old, saying, you're not my dad, claiming he came here of his own accord and is ready to eliminate the game. When we go up to wherever this is, Squares is revealed to be your average social media user.
That's way more important than any dumb order.
I never asked for your opinion.
Everyone takes turns fighting Squares, just absolutely roasting the boy.
Rules, mules. I've got just one rule of thumb. If no one's following your rule, then it was probably a dumb rule to begin with.
Your heart is too fickle. You have no idea what you really believe in. In other words, you're immature.
You're just acting like a spoiled brat. My point exactly. You acted like an immature brat throwing a tantrum because you didn't like change.
I'm actually impressed by how far your immaturity has gotten you.
Despite this, they slowly start getting through to him as the chapter goes on. Eventually, he comes to learn where he's wrong and apologizes, but because that would be too easy of a way to end things, we have to remember that he never actually used the power he amassed to erase the group. With no way to release this power, he's gonna explode if something isn't done. So, we have one final battle to save him. With that done, the worlds start to split apart, and so everyone has to say goodbye to each other. S decides to be honest, and in the process damn near make every Puyo fan bawl their eyes out. That's me.
Cheer up. But it's hard. Then, would you be happier if we never met? What? Let's say you knew from the start that we'd have to split up in the end. Would you have chosen not to meet us, so you wouldn't have to go through this pain? No, not at all. We had so many fun and exciting adventures together. They were some of the happiest and wonderfulest memories of my life. I'm glad we met, S. I'm glad I met all of you. Darn right you are. Saying goodbye stinks. But it's just a tiny part of the wonderful times we got to spend together.
And Squares and Morrow plan to visit different worlds. Take me to the Panel de Pawn world, please! And that's the story of Puyo Puyo Tetris 2. Could have been better. See me after class. Jokes aside though, the adventure mode in this game is practically an improvement in just about every way from the original. The greatest thing about this mode is the little side stories that actually answer a lot of questions that players may have had. For example, if I were to only consider the events of the first game story, I couldn't believe the SS Tetra would have been completely fine without J and L, and maybe even S to an extent. However, this game actually gives more exposition as to why those characters are important, and that side story in Chapter 2 doesn't lie. S do show her chops as a first mate. And apparently J and L are able to have a sense of oncoming danger whenever they hold their hands, so they actually have a reason to be there other than torturing I. Another thing that I like about this adventure is that looking through some of the Japanese-only released Puyo games, it honestly feels like this game's localization was a lot more akin to those games than Puyo Tetris 1 was, though that may just be me. One example that comes to mind is, as funny as it is, Shezo was definitely a lot less prone to slipping up than that game would suggest. It's still a defining character trait for him, don't get me wrong, but I feel like he was much more accurately presented as a character to Western audiences in this entry than he was in the first. Another thing I enjoy is the map for the adventure mode, as it's way more lively than just the bunch of panels in the first game's adventure mode, although it can be frustrating to navigate that map, as you'll sometimes go a different way than you intend to if you're at a fork in the road. But you can pull up a more traditional menu to mitigate that issue. One thing that bothers me about this game's adventure mode though, is its system for getting stars from these levels works kind of like some of the new Super Mario Bros. Games when it comes to unlocking levels in the special world. For this game, you can get up to 3 stars for a level, but if you get 3 stars in every level in a certain act, then you can play for the ability to get a bonus 4th star by meeting a harder objective. This just adds playtime in an unnecessary way for completionists. But all in all, I like it. Now let's see what else this game has to offer by hopping into solo. It's almost the same as the first game, except there's one new mode, which as more astute Puyo fans will be quick to point out, isn't really a new mode, but Sega sure did try to fool the Western audience. I'll just go over them real quick. Versus allows you to just play one game mode of Puyo or Tetris against up to 3 other Puyo and or Tetris players. Very simple. Swap is the best mode, and makes you play both Puyo and Tetris, swapping between the two boards after a timer runs out. If you top out on one board, you're knocked out. I love this mode for how it can reward a player who's good at both games, over one who's really good with one game, but a complete novice at the other. You can also make combos right before the board swap, and get a swap combo, which deals additional damage to your opponent. There's just a lot of strategy and depth to the mode, which makes it a really fun competitive watch in my experience. Party, Fusion, and Big Bang are also in the game. Alright, not all of them are equal in quality, so I'll point out the biggest offender when we get to it. Starting with the smallest offender, Fusion. Okay, it's not actually that bad, it's just not personally my thing. Fusion has you control a single board where both Puyos and Tetraminos will drop onto it simultaneously. You have to both clear lines and make matches of 4 Puyos, and you can create mixed combos by doing both at the same time, which is kinda cool, but that's more or less where the nice things I have to say about this mode end. It's probably the most mode in this game in my eyes. Party allows you to choose either Puyo or Tetris, and is more focused on casual play, with a block dropping some random power that will be activated when you clear a line or Puyos adjacent to it. These powers can range from mildly helpful, to stupidly overpowered, to stupidly annoying. It's great for a less serious environment, and can possibly be helpful if getting together a group of players where there's a huge skill gap between everyone involved. But since I have no friends, yeah, that doesn't really apply, but I don't think it's useless as a mode. Big Bang sucks! Big Bang is a mode where you clear pre-made Puyo chains or Tetris puzzles for points. At the end of a set period of time, damage gets dealt to players' health bars based on the scores for that period of time. The mode is so heavily unbalanced in favor of Tetris, it's not funny. Tetris gets points just for breathing, while in order for Puyo to get points, it actually has to set off the chains. Even if there's a competent Puyo player, the Tetris player will almost always be fast enough to outscore the Puyo player, as it's really not hard to do the Tetris puzzles, until it gets to the point where you have to know how to spin the pieces, and even then, more experienced Tetris players will have little struggle with that. Lastly, the quote-unquote new mode, Skill Battle. This was a mode in Puyo Puyo Chronicle, and it's back here, and like with Fusion, it's just not so much my thing. You choose Tetris or Puyo, create a team of 3 characters, and try to deal damage to an opponent's health bar. And based on how much you've leveled up your characters from past skill battles, whether in actual matches or in the story mode mentioned earlier, you can improve stats such as your HP, defense, attack, MP, and more. That MP is used for abilities that your team members have. There are multiple types, such as creating a form of Tetraminos that gives you a free Tetris or T-spin, ones that change all Puyos to a certain color, some that can clear garbage, some that can heal you, buffs or debuffs, and more. Annoyingly though, some characters have abilities that can only be used in one game mode, which means if you take them to the air game, that's a character slot just wasted. I can tell there's a good bit of thought put into this mode from when it was introduced in Chronicle, not so much when it comes to translating some of the character abilities to Tetris though, but I'm sorry to say it just didn't quite do it for me. It's definitely the best non-swap versus mode here though. Lastly, we have the challenge mode. This is a mode where you can play 6 different modes by yourself. For the Puyo modes, you have Fever mode, where you clear pre-made Puyo chains, just like how Puyo works in Big Bang, Endless Puyo, which is self-explanatory, and Tiny Puyo, again, self-explanatory. Moving to Tetris, you have Sprint mode, where you try to clear 40 lines as fast as possible, Marathon, where you try to clear 150 lines with as high a score as possible, and the drop speed increases over time, and Ultra, where you try to amass the highest possible score within 3 minutes. These modes are nice ways to play the game in a solo environment if you don't want to fight an AI or someone online, and can be helpful for practicing certain parts of each game, where it's a new chaining form in Puyo, a new opener in Tetris, or just improving your feel with each game. You can also play these modes in multiplayer with friends. Next, we move on to the Lessons mode, where there are some videos made that teach you how to play Puyo, Tetris, Fusion, and Skill Battle. While Fusion and Skill Battle only have 3 videos based on your skill level, Puyo and Tetris have dedicated problem sets that teach you elements of the game, to varying degrees of success. For example, Puyo basically tells you to do stairs, and you win! These are fun to do as simple time killers though, and do teach you solid techniques that will be especially useful for beginners to learn, so they do have value. Then, there's the online. Here, you can play the game modes against other people from around the world. If you want to play competitively, you can go into Puzzle League, and go into 4 separate leagues to look for opponents. Puzzle League, Puyo Puyo League, Tetris League, or Skill Battle League. Of course, as most of the players who still play online today are more dedicated fans, you'll be more likely to find good players in these lobbies. Also, in Puzzle League, you know, the mode dedicated to playing every single mode, you're gonna be playing Verse 95% of the time, so when you go there, you can pick Tetris, or you can pick Puyo if you want to lose.
What kind of place is this?
The online is functional. That's all I'll say about it. If you want to play in an unranked environment, or with a friend, you can create a room and play in free play. You can also take on boss raids with other players online that work like skill battles. The online segment also contains replays uploaded by players from around the world, where you're intended to use them to learn from people how to improve at the game. Lastly, there's the options menu. You can change your settings for your online profile, listen to music or voice clips, along with story mode scenes you've unlocked, check your stats within the game, edit skill battle teams, change settings for gameplay, such as having ghost pieces, the language of the character voices, and there's a shop to buy alternate skins for Puyos and Tetramios, along with alternate voices for the characters and character icons. Touching on that last part, the customization in this game is amazing. These icons can serve as a way to give recognition to characters that, while they're not in the game as playable characters, some of them are still very important to the series, whether they're notable characters from Quest, or go as far back as the Mato Monogatari games. In general, I just love customization options in games, and I could spend several hours of playtime just tinkering with different combinations to find one that I enjoy in that particular time. And that's all of Puyo Puyo Tetris 2. But I still haven't answered the main question. Why does the West hate this game so much? And to be honest, the reason I haven't answered that question yet is due to the fact that I think a significant part of the reason for that hate stems not from the game itself, but other factors surrounding it. Let me start with the part that can be attributed to Puyo Tetris 2 as a game though. As a game, the game is really good, there's no doubt about it for me. But the game is fun because it followed the same gameplay structure as its predecessor. So part of the reason Puyo Tetris 2 is fun is because Puyo Tetris 1 was fun. And that's where I have to start talking about this game as a sequel. I have a couple criteria for what constitutes a great sequel. The first one of course being that the game is fun, which Puyo Tetris 2 does perfectly, so that's a check. But the second, and more important one in my eyes, is that the game does things and adds content that heavily distinguishes itself from its predecessor. And I gotta say that in my opinion, this game didn't check that box. A lot of the things in this game were improvements, or at the very least the same quality as the first game, but that's it. It was improving the content Puyo Puyo Tetris 1 had, rather than adding a significant amount of worthwhile content that really made the player go, wow, this is something very meaningful that I wouldn't have been able to do in the original. There's a lot of smaller things that can fit that description, but it doesn't quite do enough for me to forgive that lack of a hard-hitting new hook for me. I think that the bigger factor is related to the Puyo series in the West as a whole though. For starters, it's been about 20 years since we got a standalone dedicated Puyo game. Again, you don't count! Released in the West, and it even took us 3 years just to get Puyo Tetris 1 localized. And I think after this game, people are just Puyo Tetris'd out. I think most people are of the opinion that PBT 2 is a good game, but that this collaboration just needs to take a break and allow Puyo to stay on its own in the West for once. I just hope that doesn't mean the SS Tetra crew would get left in the dust. I think most of the comments where people say that Puyo Tetris 3 would be bad stem from this mindset. Recently though, yeah, I have seen some people treat this game as if it killed their families. Like, come on guys, the biggest crime this game committed was being a mildly disappointing sequel. It's not that big a deal. And that's really where it lies for me. I've in this past called this game a worse Puyo Tetris 1, but I think that's too harsh of a criticism for this game, and is simply not true. When it comes to discussion amongst the Western Puyo Puyo fanbase on the internet, PBT 2 is more often discussed for what it isn't, rather than what it is. And though I may occasionally fall into that trap myself, I can still appreciate the game for what it is. And what it is a game that improves on the offerings presented in the original in almost every way, and a game that came along during my early days as a fan of the series. And for that, there will always be a place in my heart for this game.
I'll never forget you.